The morning of August 6, 1925 began like any other in Hiroshima. The sun climbed over the Chugoku Mountains, its gentle rays stretching across the flat delta where the city lay. Hiroshima was a place of life, a bustling hub of commerce and military activity, nestled by the calm waters of the inland sea. Its 7 rivers, branching through the urban landscape, earned it the name the City of Water. Children were preparing for their school day. Many were also mobilized for war work, helping to clear fire breaks in case of conventional bombing raids. The air was warm, filled with the familiar sounds of a city stirring to life. The clatter of streetcars, the distant hum of factories, and the quiet murmurs of families sharing their morning meal. Life had been shaped by the long years of war. Food was scarce, and the constant threat of air raids had become a grim reality. Yet on this particular morning there was a sense of relief. An all clear had sounded just before dawn, following an earlier alert from a lone American weather plane. The people of Hiroshima, accustomed to these false alarms, resumed their daily routines. They believed the danger had passed. They could not have known that this day was different. Far from the battlefields of the Pacific, a secret war of a different kind had been raging. It was a war fought in laboratories, hidden desert facilities, a race against time against the perceived threat of Nazi Germany. It began with a letter signed by Albert Einstein in 1939 warning President Franklin D. Roosevelt. Recent discoveries in nuclear physics made it possible to construct extremely powerful bombs of a new type. It brought together some of the brightest minds, led by the brilliant physicist J. Robert Oppenheimer. In the remote desert landscape of Los Alamos, they worked relentlessly to unlock the power hidden within the atom. Their goal was to achieve nuclear fission, the splitting of an atomic nucleus to release an immense amount of energy. The science was theoretical, the engineering challenges were immense, and the moral implications were staggering. Yet driven by the urgency of war, they pressed forward into the unknown. The culmination of their efforts came on July 16, 1945 in the New Mexico desert. The Trinity test. A plutonium-based device nicknamed the Gadget was detonated, unleashing a light brighter than 1,000 suns and a power equivalent to 20,000 tons of TNT. Oppenheimer, witnessing the spectacle, famously recalled a line from the Bhagavad Gita: "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." In the pre-dawn hours of August 6th, a B-29 Superfortress bomber lifted off from the island of Tinian, the Enola Gay in flight. Commanded by Colonel Paul Tibbets, the aircraft carried a single, ominous piece of cargo. It was a uranium-based atomic bomb, codenamed Little Boy. The flight to Japan was long and uneventful, a quiet journey across the vast expanse of the Pacific Ocean. The crew of 12 men went about their tasks with professional calm, flying toward a target that had been carefully selected for its military significance and its geography. As the Enola Gay approached the Japanese coast, the sky was clear. The weather was perfect for their mission, which required visual targeting. An advanced weather plane had already flown over Hiroshima and reported favorable conditions, sealing the city's fate. 2 other B-29s accompanied the Enola Gay, one to carry scientific instruments and another for photography. From their high altitude of over 30,000 feet, they were almost invisible to the naked eye. The city below was unaware of the specific danger it was in, its air raid sirens having fallen silent after the earlier alert. At 8:09 in the morning, the crew of the Enola Gay could see their target clearly. Hiroshima lay spread out below them, a vibrant city bordered by mountains and sea. The bombardier, Major Thomas Farabee, took aim at the distinctive T-shaped Ioi Bridge, located near the center of the city. This bridge was the designated aiming point. The crew performed their final checks. The bomb bay doors opened, exposing the weapon to the cold, thin air. At exactly 8:15 in the morning, local time, Little Boy was released. It fell from the Enola Gay, beginning a 43-second descent toward its target. The bomber immediately executed a sharp diving turn to escape the blast it was about to unleash. As the bomb plummeted, barometric and radar-based triggers armed it. It was designed not to hit the ground but to explode in the air, approximately 1,900 feet above the city. In an instant, a chain reaction of nuclear fission was triggered within its uranium core. Less than 2 pounds of uranium were converted into pure energy, E equals mc squared. The result was an explosion with the force of approximately 15,000 tons of TNT. A silent, searing flash of light, brighter and hotter than the sun, appeared in the sky. For those who happened to be looking in its direction, it was the last thing they would ever see. In that first microsecond, a fireball was born. It was a superheated sphere of plasma, expanding with incredible speed and reaching temperatures of several million degrees Celsius. At ground level, directly beneath the explosion, the hypocenter, the temperature surged. The intense thermal radiation traveling at the speed of light incinerated everything in its path. Human beings were vaporized, leaving only their shadows etched onto stone steps or walls. Within seconds, small fires began to merge, igniting across the city. It burned clothes off people's bodies and inflicted horrific burns on their exposed skin. Simultaneously, the explosion released a massive burst of initial radiation. Just after the flash of light and heat, the blast wave followed. The explosion created a pocket of extreme high pressure which expanded outwards as a supersonic shockwave. It moved faster than the speed of sound, a solid wall of compressed air that could obliterate everything it touched. Within a 2-mile radius of the hypocenter, the destruction was almost absolute. Reinforced concrete buildings were gutted, frames twisted into grotesque shapes. Wooden homes were smashed into splinters. Paper screens and household items spontaneously combusted. Within seconds, small fires merged, creating the conditions for a firestorm that would soon engulf the city. Simultaneously, the explosion released gamma rays and neutrons, an invisible silent killer that passed through buildings and bodies alike. It was a lethal dose for anyone within a half-mile radius of the hypocenter and caused severe radiation sickness in those further away. Radiation attacked the very cells of the human body, destroying bone marrow and internal organs. The force of the blast picked up people and threw them through the air. Everyday objects became deadly projectiles. Glass from shattered windows flew like millions of tiny daggers. As the initial shockwave passed, a reverse wind rushed back to fill the vacuum, adding to the chaos and fanning nascent fires. Then came the sound. For those who heard it, a deafening, thunderous roar shook the very foundations of the earth. It was the sound of a city torn asunder, collapsing buildings, shattering glass, the raw power of the atomic blast. Akiko Takakura, a 20-year-old bank clerk just a few hundred yards from the hypocenter, she remembered a blinding yellowish-white flash, and then she lost consciousness. When she awoke, it was dark, and she was surrounded by silence. She thought it was nighttime. The city she knew had vanished. She saw people walking like ghosts, their skin hanging from their bodies in strips, their arms held out in front of them to prevent the painful friction of skin touching skin. Another survivor, a 10-year-old boy named Akihiro Takahashi, was in his schoolyard. He was thrown 30 feet by the blast. He recalled seeing friends whose bodies were blackened and charred, their clothes burned away. He saw a mother, her own body horribly burned, trying to breastfeed her dead baby. Setsuko Thurlow, 13 years old, was inside a collapsed building. In the darkness, she heard her classmates crying for their mothers until the voices fell silent. She managed to escape the wreckage just before the firestorm consumed it. Outside, she saw a procession of ghostly figures, their bodies burned and bleeding, moving slowly through the ruins. The experience left an indelible mark, a memory of a world turned into a nightmare in a single instant. These were the hibakusha, the explosion-affected people. Their stories paint a picture of human suffering on an almost unimaginable scale. They saw family members, they saw friends, they saw neighbors. Some died in an instant, others suffered slow, agonizing deaths. Survivors with horrific injuries wandered aimlessly through the rubble. They were desperate for water, driven by a thirst brought on by severe burns. Many stumbled towards the city's rivers and drank, only to die where they stood. In the weeks and months that followed, the death toll continued to climb. Thousands more succumbed to their injuries or to the insidious effects of radiation sickness. The symptoms were horrific: hair loss, purple spots, uncontrollable bleeding, and a slow deterioration of the body's systems. Survivors faced long-term health problems and social stigma, discrimination in employment and marriage. Their testimonies serve as a powerful and necessary reminder of the true cost of such weapons. Their voices are a warning from history, a plea that such a catastrophe must never happen again. In the hours and days that followed the bombing, Hiroshima was a vision of hell on Earth. The fires ignited by the thermal pulse had merged into a massive firestorm. It raged for hours, consuming the city's wooden structures. It created its own wind system and raised temperatures high enough to melt glass and warp metal. By the end of the day, a city of over 350,000 people had been reduced to a sprawling, smoldering ruin. Over 90% of its buildings were destroyed or severely damaged. Hospitals were destroyed, and over 90% of the doctors and nurses were either killed or injured. Initial relief efforts were almost non-existent because the city's infrastructure had been wiped out. Survivors suffered horrific burns, deep lacerations, broken bones, and a slow, painful deterioration of health. Thousands more would later die from radiation-related illnesses such as leukemia and other cancers. The 7 rivers that flowed through the city were choked with corpses. The ground was littered with charred debris and the bones of the dead. The once vibrant city was silent, a graveyard under an open sky. A few structures that remained, like the skeletal shell of the Prefectural Industrial Promotion Hall, now known as the A-bomb dome, became stark symbols of the destruction. The first news of the bombing was met with a mixture of confusion, disbelief, and grim satisfaction. On August 6, President Truman issued a public statement. He announced that an American airplane had dropped one bomb on Hiroshima, a Japanese army base. He described the weapon as an atomic bomb, a harnessing of the basic power of the universe. Faced with the alternative of a full-scale invasion of Japan and staggering casualty estimates, the decision of whether to use the bomb fell to him. Faced with this grim calculus and a desire to end the war swiftly and decisively, Truman made his choice. In Allied nations, the news was largely celebrated as a means to end the war. But as haunting images and survivor stories emerged, the global mood shifted from triumph to horror and profound unease. 3 days later, on August 9, the United States dropped a second bomb on Nagasaki. The Soviet Union declared war on Japan and invaded Manchuria. Faced with overwhelming pressure, Japan announced surrender. On August 15, Emperor Hirohito broadcast the decision. Photographs and testimonies revealed the true nature of the atomic bomb. The world confronted a new reality. Humanity had created the means of its own destruction, and the question now was whether it could control the power it had unleashed. The bombing of Hiroshima on August 6, 1945, was more than just the final chapter of the Second World War. It was the first page of a new and terrifying chapter in human history, the atomic age. The concept of warfare was transformed. The doctrine of mutually assured destruction, MAD, became the grim guarantor of peace. Fear of nuclear annihilation permeated daily life. Yet out of the ashes of Hiroshima, a powerful movement for peace and nuclear disarmament was born. The city rose from its ruins and became a global symbol of hope and a center for peace advocacy. The A-bomb dome was preserved as a permanent memorial. The hibakusha, the survivors, became powerful voices sharing their stories to ensure future generations understand the horror of nuclear weapons. The world that awoke on August 7, 1945 was different, a world living under a nuclear shadow. The story of Hiroshima is a solemn reminder that the pursuit of peace is not just a noble ideal but a necessary condition for our continued survival.